Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast that goes inside the minds of the leaders building our future.
The difficult we do today, the impossible we do tomorrow.
I'm Josh Huggins, founder of GS2, a search firm dedicated to finding the visionaries powering the most critical shift of our time, the US energy transition.
So much of what I do is passion driven because of those experiences.
This season, we're tracing the unique journeys of the architects of America's new energy landscape, exploring how their diverse backgrounds forged the psychology, the ambition, and the brutal truths required to lead in a time of unprecedented change.
If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to be a risk taker, and you got to be able to take calculated risk.
My mission is to uncover the playbook of the leaders in the industry, so we can all learn what it takes to build a world that's truly better than we found it.
So hello and welcome back to Better Than We Found It, the podcast where we talk to the leaders and innovators building a more sustainable world. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, and today my guest is a leader whose career has been defined by executing massive mission-critical projects at an incredible scale. Chris Hodrick is the CEO of Qcells USA Corp, a pivotal company in America's energy transition, but his journey is anything but conventional. He spent over 2 decades in the US Navy as a Civil Engineer Corps Officer, a CB, leading construction projects globally. He then transitioned to the private sector, where he led a team that at their peak within 3 years delivered over $35 billion in new construction for Amazon during its period of hypergrowth. From there, he took the helm of multi-billion-dollar solar and storage business with a workforce of 9,000 people in Blattner. And today we dig into that remarkable journey, the leadership lessons learned from the military, the challenge of translating that experience into the commercial world, and the current mission at Qcells to build a complete American-made solar supply chain. So if you want to know what it takes to lead and build at scale, you're in the right place. So let's dive in. So Chris, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here.
Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation. Now, before you joined, I gave a quick overview and intro to yourself. I'm sure I didn't do it justice. So for those who don't know who you are, would you mind just giving a quick overview of yourself and your role at Qcells and the business?
Sure. No, appreciate it. I certainly will. My name is Chris Hodrick. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Qcells USA, and we are the EPC component of Qcells. Qcells was acquired by Hanwha back in the 2015 timeframe, and basically focused on module manufacturing in the PV space. And a couple of years ago, they made a commitment to vertically integrate and create an EPC arm in order to sell the modules. Now we can install them for you. And likewise, there's some other Hanwha affiliated companies that come into O&M and some other areas and create an ecosystem for the customers. And there's some really hugely valuable opportunities with that, for our warranty, full wrap, and kind of just life cycle understanding of what it takes to be successful and be solutions oriented. So join the company. As I mentioned, I run the EPC portion. EPC, for those that aren't familiar, is engineer, procurement, and construction. And so we'll work basically after a project is developed, and take that through engineering and then procure all the bits and pieces, and then construct it out in the field, and then we hand it off to an O&M partner. And within my business unit, I also have responsibility for the module sales for utility scale solar on behalf of Qcells North America, which is the manufacturing arm.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, really keen to get into that in more detail, but as we discussed prior to this, you've got a very interesting journey and story that I'm keen to tell and understand more. So let's go all the way back and start at the beginning. You mentioned to me that you grew up in the coal region in Pennsylvania, in quite a blue collar, community focused area and environment. Tell me, I suppose, a bit more about that upbringing and how you believe that helped shape your, I suppose, outlook and view of leadership, and turned you into the leader you are today.
Sure. No, I credit my upbringing, in the coal region of Pennsylvania, to a lot of who I am today. And the lessons you learn, we're surrounded by parents. All my friends, we were fortunate, 2-family homes or 2-parent homes, very, very consistent. And all of them had the authority to look out after the kids. So if you're getting out of line, some parent was going to get you back in line. So very common morals, very common virtue, very common foundation, and like-minded about what's right and wrong. And it provides a lot of that background. Schooling, I'm a product of public schools. And I'm a very proud product of public school. I think I put my education up against anyone. And again, the teachers in the schools, they were part of the community. They were part of our families. They were part of the extended. We saw them outside of school. And likewise, if you were in school, you got in trouble. You got in trouble twice, there and then at home, which isn't always the case these days. And so what I learned through that is really a personal accountability, and you need to be prepared, because if you weren't, I was bred to be, hey, do your part, learn how to contribute, get the most out of what your opportunities might lie, and whether that be in school, whether that be in sports, whether that be I was an altar server at church, kind of took a lot of pride that when the bishop came to town, my brother and I were the ones that were selected to support that mass. And we did not go to the Catholic school. We were the public school kids. And so even more, just a point of pride for us, and just, again, giving it your all was a big piece of that. Sports during that time are very important to the Coal region, as it is to a lot of small towns. Played 3 sports. I was a basketball, football, and I did track and field in high school. And again, team sports and the foundation of how you win, how you lose, how you commit, how you people rely on you, how you rely on them. It just sets you up for success later on in life. How you deal with adversity, knock yourself down, get yourself up. I mean, you have to be ready to do that. The world doesn't stop around you. A good friend of mine, Eric Capicillo, that I went to the Naval Academy with, he runs a company called The Program. I heard him say it, and it may not be directly attributed to him, but I attribute it to him. Parents' job is to prepare the child for the path, not the path for the child. And we got a lot of that, preparing us to go out there into the world and contribute and not expect it to be handed to you. And so that was a basis and the foundation, for me growing up.
Sure. It's interesting you talk about sports and team sports in particular, because I've always found that to be something that's quite special when we recruit people for our own business. I don't know whether you've seen that similarly for you, but typically we find people that have performed well in team sports have the ability to translate that into the business and commercial world. Have you found that? And what do you think that? Why do you think that is?
I ascribe to that wholeheartedly, and I've expanded it over the years, to be honest, because it was somewhat limiting. Because it's not always sports. Sports are common when it's easy to understand, but if you're part of something bigger than yourself, you may have been part of a band and orchestra. You may have been part of an Eagle Scout. You may have been involved in something that took years of commitment. It took dedication. You had to perform. You had to get through when you had an off-par performance. And sports is the easy one, because that's what I know and that's what you know. But I found that not everybody's equipped to do sports or is interested in sports, and I was cutting myself short a little bit by not expanding that. But the key piece for me is part of something bigger than yourself. That's the key piece, because when somebody comes in, they know how to work on a team. They know how to collaborate. They know how to pick each other up, and they know how to kind of disagree, and they know how to commit to whatever the plan is going to be.
Sure.
And so you're right. People who have been exposed to that are great teammates, and I look for them on my teams as well.
Sure, yeah. I think it's that one of the things I reckon I put it down to is that the personal accountability when you're part of something bigger than yourself. You have to show up, because it's not just for yourself, but it's for your team, and you're letting them down as much as you're letting yourself down. And I think when that gets built into you quite early on, it becomes a life habit that you can't avoid. You have to do it. You feel a sense of obligation, and I think maybe there's something to do with that, which is interesting. Just interesting. Of the 3 sports you had, what was the one that you were best at?
I had the most success in football. I was recruited to play football in college, and that's the one that stayed with me all the way along. I fancy myself a pretty good basketball player, I was a rebounder. Dennis Rodman, and the way he attacked the game, and that's what he did. I kind of always appreciated that, and the big man kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I like to go out and shoot. I like that part of it too. So I was a little bit of a renaissance man before it was the wide open offense it is today.
Yeah.
But football's where it's at for me, and that was when all said and done, that's kind of what people think of me. That's what they think of as football.
Sure, understood. So at the school you attended the U.S. Naval Academy, and I think it was over 20 years you spent there in was it the Civil Engineers Corps, the CBs?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
that's correct.
So you've had this, I suppose, sports upbringing and close knit community, and then you move into something again bigger than yourself, but of course with even, I suppose, stricter discipline systems. Community that you have to work within, and then the pressure of that environment as well. How did that, I suppose, adds to what you already had as these sort of basic fundamental skills and take you further and equip you for that next step into the world of construction and engineering?
Sure. Take a second. The Naval Academy. My father served in the Navy for 3 years. Way back prior to, but didn't have a big service connection other than that. And so I kind of went into the Naval Academy, I won't say ill prepared, but kind of very naive about what it is and what I was getting into. But I just go back and I attribute that my ability to navigate that space and successfully complete that program based on what I learned growing up, because that's really what it comes down to. You're pushing yourself beyond perceived limits and really contributing and being on a team. Whether it be the football team or the larger Navy team and America's team. And so getting through there, and when it came time to graduate, everybody's anxious to go off and do your thing and get on to that next chapter, like you said. And I was fortunate enough to get selected into the Civil Engineer Corps, which is a relatively small group in the U.S. Navy. It's about 1,200 officers, give or take. And there's a pretty good, mix of men and women and some good diversity as well. And you need to be an engineer and architect to affiliate, because that's what they're depending you to do. And you do the facilities management, construction manager for Navy Marine Corps installations, and then support the Marine Corps and contingency assignments, combat assignments. And similar to that sports and upbringing in that environment, the peacetime world or the facilities management, construction management, it's a very small number of military people in a predominantly civilian military kind of organization on board a military installation. And so, leading civilians is a little different than leading military, right? And, it's a great test of what you've learned and how you apply it and how you motivate folks and how you communicate and align people on a common end state. When you're dealing with sometimes, 10, 15, 20-year civilian, who has seen a number of us come through there, it's very easy for them to kind of wait you out, right? And kind of they know better. They know what the installation needs much better than we do. And so making a connection with them is really, really important. If anything, to get them to contribute and lean in, and kind of you get the value of their experience, you get the value of that expertise, and again, that team sports background, helps that, right? Likewise, you go into the CB assignments. Now you're working all military. And, leading teams into either, a planned mission or things come up, and you need to navigate ambiguity. You need to deal with uncertainty, and not always know what's happening, but you're asking people to do something that you trained them to do. And that's really what's important. And that's been a piece that I've carried through my life is, this operating system mentality that people know what they're supposed to do. It's clear, the role, responsibility, the authority piece of it, what the risks are, what the opportunities are. And you train that, you condition that so that when the pressure's on, you're not having to think through. It's also it's muscle memory. And people are able to react to unknowns and variables versus just trying to think, hey, what am I supposed to do? And that's where I really was exposed to that for the first time. I had a couple of combat contingency assignments over my time to do that. And you're asking kids to go, you're scared, right? You can't communicate that because you don't know, and it's dangerous. And you're charged with this responsibility of our nation's treasure, we like to call it. The youth of America kind of go out there to do things that we believe in, and it's all part of just knowing what to do and how to step in, contribute, and prepare.
Sure. And I suppose there's parallels you definitely draw on that with leading an organization. You can be, maybe not scared in the same way, but, there's fear about the unknown and leading an organization into new territory, in terms of the strategy that you decide and trying to make sure everybody's aligned to that in terms of the operating system as well. But how do you, so the question I would have to pose back to that is, how do you still give people the individual accountability or ability to perhaps show their individual spirit within the framework that you said?
I'm gonna define accountability real quick, because that's one that's often misconstrued. Everybody likes to think of accountability when something goes wrong and somebody's going to pay for it, right? Heads are going to roll, or something, whoever's going to take the blame, or whatever the case may be. But that's actually, at the end of an accountability process, and that's why I explain to my teams, it starts with me being accountable to you, very clearly articulating, here's what I expect you to do, here's what I need you to do, here's what you signed up to do. Are we aligned? Do you understand that piece of it? Do you accept your mission, to use a Mission Impossible reference, right? Are you resourced to do it? Have I empowered and enabled you to do your job? Do you have the authorities you need to do your job? Do you understand, how to get assistance? That's the start of accountability. I am accountable to you to prepare you to do what we're going to ask you to do, whether it be in the military environment, combat operation, or just go out there and operate in business, right? It's all that. And then once that happens, once we're aligned, right, now it's your turn to be accountable. You're accountable to the company, to do your part. The company is paying you, to do this on their behalf. And now we can have a true synergistic, accountable relationship for each other, and keep each other accountable, keep each other aligned, accordingly. And that's the mindset that I try to instill. That's to really run decentralized operations and have confidence that people are going to be able to perform, in a manner that I'm an eternal optimist that they really want to, and then how we need them to do that. It all starts right there. That's the foundation.
Sure, understood. And pivoting this slightly more to the energy world, I think it was here that you had your first real taste of the energy transition. If I'm right in saying there was a coal-fired plant that you were moving to natural gas. To tell me more about that project that you were part of, and I suppose how it sort of opened your eyes to the world of energy and actually the transition.
Sure, and there's a couple lessons that are baked into that, but to your point, I was at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, as the director of public works, and it was my final assignment in the Navy, and it was actually also the location of my very first assignment in the Navy, and there were still some people, as I mentioned, some of the civilians are there for a long time. There were some there, and they remembered this young green ensign from 20 years prior. And they gave me grace to kind of grown a lot in that time. We had a coal-fired steam plant. The whole base and installation built in the 40s was supported by steam, basically for heating, hot water, and everything else. But over the years, that system starts to fail because it's very inefficient. On top of the environmental impact of coal emissions and NOx emissions and things like that. So a lot of very smart people, both at the installation level and then higher up throughout the government, put together the plan to decentralize that coal fire plant, decommission it, take it offline, and then come in with natural gas. So partnered with Piedmont Natural Gas there in North Carolina, and to run the natural gas lines throughout the entire installation. It was a huge installation, hundreds of thousands of acres, about 290 square miles. And then our part of it was building out the infrastructure to support all the buildings, the barracks, thousands of buildings that now we'd be replacing that heat with decentralized steam. And so you mentioned, it was there's a climate aspect of it. There's an operational efficiency standpoint of it, as well as just some resiliency in the installation. You weren't relying on one common generation source. But here's the second piece of that of where, again, the systems thinking. One of the first things we did was we brought technicians and we brought the maintainers into the planning process. And this was important, and it paid dividends immediately. We were building, there were these small clusters of buildings, and they were supported by a small building in the middle that housed the steam generation, the natural gas fired boilers. And obviously, from one standpoint, you want to make that as small as you can, minimize your footprint. But it was the point where it was so small, the maintainers could not do any maintenance in there. They couldn't repair or respond. And so, we wouldn't have known that until much later in the process had we not brought them into the equation. And they were able to quickly see that. We were able to shift gears on that, immediately. Very little rework on the ones that were built. But then, and they felt heard, and they felt part of the team, and they felt part of the process. And it was a win for the team. It was a win for the installation, as being part of that as well. So that'll come back in here as we talk a little bit, I'm sure. But it's a big piece of it, kind of how we attack problems is we do it collaboratively.
For sure, understood. And you, and I suppose one of the points you mentioned there that was also the lesson was the sustainability angle and the angle of reducing emissions with that. How prevalent had energy, or infrastructure around energy been in your life to that point, and how did that go through that process open your eyes to what was becoming more and more possible around the energy transition?
Sure. The Civil Engineer Corps, it really is the facilities, it's the public works of the installation. And you're obviously, you're worried about utilities, facility services, water, is huge. Heating is another one. Wastewater, how that's managed, landfills. You're working very closely with the environmental folks, on emissions and permitting and things like that. So that's really a backdrop to every assignment. And as you go through your career, you get exposed to higher level, discussions and longer reaching planning and programming to kind of make an impact versus just executing projects that were baked, 5-6 years prior. And that was a good culmination of many different aspects, as I mentioned, and you picked up on, the emissions component of it, the sustainability, the environmental impact, that really made it a successful project in a lot of ways. But having that exposure really, how does it all fit together? And because, and we would joke amongst each other. In fact, I called a friend of mine when I was at the Naval War College, and she was the public works director. And I told her, I said, "Hey, thanks." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I came in today, I turned the lights on, they worked. I went to the restroom, it flushed. And I'm sitting at my desk doing my work with the light on. Everything worked." And she's like, "What?" Because nobody calls you when something works, right?
Yeah.
Only when there's a problem. And so, we pride ourselves by being, unseen, because you're there providing service for folks, and they don't even know, but it's there because we need them to do something bigger and better.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So one of the things that really stood out to me when I was researching your background ahead of this conversation was then the monumental leap from, the military operation and what you've done there to what must have been in, I think it was 2015, one of the most commercial, high growth organizations in Amazon. And I suppose that transition from military life to such a commercial environment. My first question was how you convinced an organization like Amazon to take you at that point, because I think there's some real lessons there of how you positioned the transferable skills that you had. But then secondly, I suppose, in terms of actually, once you landed, how you adapted to what I would imagine to be, although there would have been some similarities, a very different environment overall. So how did you manage it firstly? And then, what were the lessons that you learned?
Sure. To Amazon's credit, they reached out to me, on a cold call saying, "Hey, we're getting ready to do something really exciting, and we'd like to talk to you if you want to be part of it." And at the time, I had just been over 20 years in the Navy, so I was eligible to retire. And so I said, "Sure, I'll talk to you. Let's see what's going on." And one thing led to another, and they made an offer I couldn't refuse. And I hung up my uniform and joined Amazon. But in going through the process, it was interesting because Amazon, prides itself. It's always day one, right? They want to really stay anchored on, this nimble startup kind of mentality. And now that they're approaching probably 2 million employees, that gets harder and harder, right? But they still want to hold on to it. And I think one thing that they recognize in our conversations is, the military provides a basis of understanding and doctrinal approach to things. And again, you develop muscle memory, you really understand, core competency kind of thought, and what really need, prioritize effort, the logistics that have to go into that to make sure things are successful, and all that systems level thinking to kind of pull it all together. And that's key because what the military is very good at, and people don't always recognize or appreciate, is how to deal with ambiguity, right? How to deal with uncertainty, and bring some kind of certainty, in a chaotic situation. And it's that kind of mindset. Sometimes people will get overwhelmed. There are too many things changing, too many, how do you see through that fog? And as you mentioned, Amazon was getting ready to really grow and step in areas that it was not known, anywhere, because of what they were doing. People, kind of make this statement, you're building the plane as you're flying it, kind of thing, because you don't know where it's going to go, but you got to go there. And, that's uncertainty, and that's chaos, and bringing some structure to that was really important to them. And to their credit, gave me a lot of autonomy to build systems and build standard work and build teams and a structure that enabled us to do, a lot of work with a relatively small group of people that really culminated during COVID, where, people relied on Amazon, and Amazon really had to surge very, very quickly to be able to support the network and work with suppliers and vendors to kind of bring stuff to people. And that was, as I mentioned, the culminating of that event. But, by fortune, I had 5-6 years ahead of that to kind of build the team and structure, and we were able to perform. So, yeah, they wasn't, it's talking to some folks, especially in the Pacific Northwest, they kind of fancy themselves, pretty easygoing, laid back, and we're much different than you are. And it turns out, they recognize we weren't that much different. We both were, think about things differently, and applying tools and mechanisms to kind of do things that were unheard of or haven't been thought of yet.
Sure, yeah. So I was going to ask you about the fundamental differences in the philosophy, but as you were talking it through, it was taking me back to the earlier example you said about in the military, preparing people, being scared yourself, not knowing how to do this, learning as you go. But, I suppose in Amazon breaking the boundaries as it did, you were going through that very similar program anyway. So I can certainly see the synergy there. But from if there was one cultural adjustment that you had to make, or lesson that you learned quite quickly in your time that you got wrong or you didn't quite do right, what would you say that was?
I'll share one first that worked out well. In the Navy, I was a contracting officer, so got a lot of contract administration training, and on behalf of the federal government, and all the rules and regulations go along with that. So really, the federal government does a very good job at teaching people how to, build a contract, and how to enforce a contract, and how to structure it. It's not always equipped to move quickly for various reasons, but you have the foundational skills of how to do it well. At Amazon, I was able to leverage those skills and that experience in an environment that allowed me to move fast. I was able to make decisions in real time. We didn't have to go back and forth with letters and kind of figure things out before we made a move. And Amazon needed us to do that so that we could deliver on time. Because in the early days, we joke a little bit, they gave us a bag of money. They gave us kind of, hey, we need to be here with this kind of building. Go do it. Make sure it's open on March 10th. Right. Okay. And you talk about ambiguity, right? And a lot of pressure. And so I, took those lessons, and that was key. Finding the right partners, the right contractors, the right developers, the right stakeholders who were willing to take that journey with us. Amazon can be difficult because they don't always know, but they need to go, right? and but we were good partners, and did a lot, together to get there. Now, what did I not do right? It's it's hard to say because if one thing I learned at Amazon, if you're going to fail fast. Take the learnings from that and then move forward. And one example that we had, trying to eliminate one building in the network, we brought in a sortation platform in one of the bigger buildings in order to be able to sort packages and send them directly to a post office and they're ready to deliver, right? And invested heavily to do that. Got off and running on multiple buildings, but then came back and rethought it. And leadership said, no, that's not going to pay off. It doesn't pencil. Rip them all out, right? And so we had to rip them all out and then kind of build from there. So while that wasn't something I did or did not do as a team, it was something that it had a lot of people do a lot of things and move very quickly, and sometimes it didn't make a lot of sense. But I was fortunate, like I said, build a great team, was surrounded by great people. You hear sometimes these horror stories about leadership and things at Amazon. I did not witness any of that firsthand, and it was a very collaborative environment. And I can say nothing bad about my time. They treated me very well. I learned a lot and gained a lot in Amazon, and I treasure my time there.
Well, clearly, because I've spoken to a lot of people who have worked for the firm, and particularly in the leadership level role that you were, to have been there through such turbulent times and actually go and be there coming up to 8 years, I suppose, is a sign that, one, you enjoyed it, and number two, that you performed, because I know how ruthless the business can be to not tolerate any underperformance. So that clearly showed. But next, your move was to Blattner. So how did that come around? And perhaps you could just share a little bit more about that role for the audience.
Sure. Similar. Blattner came looking for somebody who did something they didn't know how to do. And this, Blattner had been around for a long time, about 115, 120 years, and a lot of civil heavy construction over the years, everything from railroads, mining to highway, you name it, bridges, and a lot of things. And they pivoted to renewables about 20 some years ago, first in wind and then in solar. But it was a privately owned company for its entire existence up until about 5 years ago when it was acquired by Quantum Services, simultaneously working right around, the forecast for renewables, especially around solar and storage, and what was going to happen in that market. And Blattner recognized that, hey, we need to think about this differently from an operating system standpoint. Let's find somebody who maybe isn't from the industry, which is a different way of thinking within the renewable industry, but who knows how to build and scale teams and implement operating systems. And that's what led them to me. And joined that team and got off a great start, kind of assessing, hey, here's what we do well, here's where we have opportunity. And Blattner's about a 10,000 person strong company. It's pretty big in that space, and they've done a lot of great things. And over the years, I think a quarter of all renewable projects that have a Blattner stamp on them, and so very well known in the industry. But it's hard to change, significantly when you're that big and you have that legacy, thinking. And so some of those systems are a little harder to do, to kind of get there and invest in time, which is really difficult sometimes, and as well as just capability of system to kind of pivot, especially when what you're doing and how you were doing it wasn't broken, right? And so, especially coming into this year, new administration, a lot of discussion around the IRA and investment in tax credits and permitting and all the other stuff that makes renewable projects go. They saw that coming, and kind of opted to kind of, hey, you know what, let's stay the course of what we know and kind of make sure we can deliver rather than taking a chance and doing it a different way, sort of thing. So,
sure, understood. So I suppose there's a couple of new things that you moved to there. So firstly, moving to the contractor side, having been the client for so long, and then, as you say, also not being from a renewable background, although you've had some exposure to it, of course, as a purchaser, but moving to being the contractor side. So again, how did you find that move from client to contractor, and I suppose the different type of relationship you then had with not only your own team but with your clients?
Yeah, I actually think it's a strength. And I still use this. And my old boss at Blatter used to laugh at me when I said it, but I would tell developers and owners who were working with it. I was sitting in your seat not that long ago, and I know what it's like to pick up a phone, call your contractor partner, and feel like I am their only customer. And the value it has, that they know what I'm trying to do, they know what my program's all about, and I can see them as true partners in developing solutions and adding value. And one of the things I really tried to implement and kind of keep top of mind at Blattner is that mindset. Amazon calls it customer obsession, right? Everywhere else it's just being aligned with what the customer needs. Because if you can deliver, and this has been something that I've really trying to instill at Qcells, certainty, especially in this time frame of all this chaos. If you can deliver certainty around quality, performance, around cost and schedule, guess what? You will write your own ticket, because that's what partners need. That's what utilities, that's what developers, that's what owners need when they make the investment, when they're dealing with financiers, and they're doing permitting, assigning PPAs, and making these commitments. They need that certainty. And understanding that piece of it really helps identify opportunities within the contractor value stream of where you really find efficiencies, and you find areas to get time, return time back to the project. Don't waste that only truly non-renewable resource of time, and make sure we're aligned with that customer. So that's the big piece coming over and making that transition. The learning curve is pretty steep. I might have underestimated a little bit because it's, at the end of the day, it's not overly complex, but there are a lot of significant moving parts. Both building a project out in the field. I already mentioned about the safety aspect as a project unfolds, but then also you have communities who might not be advocates of solar, right? And it can be difficult that way. You have state and permitting agencies kind of working through different challenges, environmental concerns, labor markets are different, and having to deal with that now as a contractor. Really it tests everything you have. A lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, a lot of collaboration to kind of be successful, because now you're on the hook to deliver that, regardless of what's going to come at you.
Yeah, you said something earlier about when it's at that scale, though, and it's not, I suppose, broken. The system that you're walking into at a senior level is pretty fixed. So, as a leader, when you're moving into an organization with a large number of employees, and you're assessing the changes that need to be made, how do you view things to ensure that your message can disseminate down through the organization? But also, do you have a particular, I suppose, sort of structure that you work at, which means your teams can still, despite their size, be agile and adapt to the changes that you're trying to make? What's your kind of approach and philosophy there?
Yeah, it's important to really assess, what is going on now, and more importantly, why does it happen, right? To really, so you don't, because it's very easy to jump into a solution and it be wrong on 14 different levels, right? Understand, the environment, understand why things are done a certain way. And then once you start doing that, things all of a sudden start to reveal themselves. Where you might have broken processes, right? Or you may have processes that are very good, but people just don't follow them, right? And so where's the structure and accountability there? And it can be as quick as tightening those up. But a lot of times it comes down to alignment and people understanding that every single person in that company has a role. There's a reason they're there. All right. But sometimes we just jump to or around or over something because we don't take the time to understand it. I can remember, I think it's Lincoln, it gets attributed to, if you give me 5 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe, right? And that's really something to try to approach, put the system in place, teach it, coach it, mentor it, manage it. And then, now we all know what each other's doing, right? And that's really, a piece, and a lot of companies struggle with this. It's not one over another. But really, it doesn't get the attention it needs to because everybody, shifts to focusing on what is happening now versus being prepared for what's going to happen next or what should have happened before to better position me to be successful now. So.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think there's some good lessons there. So in this move to renewables, I saw that your role also expanded and you served as a board member for the Solar Energy Industries Association. How did that role, alongside your executive position, shape your outlook on the industry and the sector? And also, I suppose maybe that was the first real insight you had into the political forces, I suppose, that can be at play in an industry like this. And often, they have been in some capacity, and particularly more recently, at odds with the innovation that the industry's been going through. So, tell us more about that role and remit and how it shaped then your view of your day job.
Sure. Now, you kind of hit on it, right? Being that up close and personal to, the power centers around Washington and other areas and how SEIA represents the industry. And it's wide. It's everything from utility scale down to residential and everything in between. It's vendors, it's suppliers, and everybody who's associated with SEIA kind of has become that all-encompassing blanket to kind of help navigate it. And Abby Hopper, who's the present CEO, and what she's done to create that team and that vision is really important. A lot of success, that turned into a lot of wow. Now what are we going to do? But they were ready. There was a lot of analysis. Going into last year's election, and there was 3 big scenarios that, it goes all blue, all red, or something mixed. And what does this mean? And he would bring in, government speakers and people who are associated with, the different areas. And hey, here's our perspective. Here's what we're thinking about. And here's where you see it unfolding, and to be as prepared as they can be. And even now you see SEIA taking a leading role in navigating this space and kind of, because the market has to evolve, right? And Abby had posted something the other day that I read it, and there was somebody from oil and gas commented on it. I'm like, kind of poke a little bit, and they made a comment. I had to read it twice, and they said, your industry has to evolve. It has to be cost competitive, and in order to survive, right? And at first, I'm like, well, that's easy for somebody who has a commodity that people buy on top of the energy that it produces. Nobody's charging for the sun, right? So we're already a step behind that way. But he was right, and this is where I think that the market is really going to come out stronger. Is the tax incentives, the tax credits were a crutch to kind of help the market get up and running, and it's going to have to evolve because the requirement's not going away. People are not going to stop using AI. They're not going to stop, cloud computing and everything comes in between it. We're going to have to find a way to, again, certainty, price certainty to kind of deliver, quality outcomes, and find different ways to approach it. It will, oh, sorry. It will, there's a certain amount of, weeding out that's going to happen. The opportunists that enter the market because there are really, really no barriers to entry, they're going to fall by the wayside, and it will, it'll be a survival of the fittest. People who really have, effective and functional systems in place, they're going to survive, and they're going to make a difference. But it's going to require some evolution. It's going to require some innovation. And if anything, the current, the administration, the big beautiful bill, and all the things that it has done has just accelerated that move. And SEIA is right there in the front of it, and being affiliated with SEIA and a lot of great minds there, a lot of great people who are passionate about the space, who bring different perspectives, different backgrounds. It was really, it's just, whenever we would get together, there was something different, that you would learn a perspective, and it really made some great connections there, and learn from people. So
sure. And that point you said about the individual from the oil and gas background making that sort of more commercial statement, as you say, can be seen as sort of maybe poking the bear, particularly in the current situation. But as you say, there's a fundamental truth in that any sector in any industry has to be commercially viable to operate and continue to operate, regardless if it's the right thing to do long term. It does need to be stimulated at some times, but there's times where it needs to be able to stand on its own. Do you think, playing devil's advocate, that there's enough of that commercial viewpoint inside the industry to recognize that?
I think the people who don't recognize it are the ones that are going to fall by the wayside, because they're either going to think they can wait it out, or think that there's some kind of change that's going to happen and they're going to get left behind. A number of companies are already moving that direction. You're kind of, how do I add value, right? How can I contribute here? And sometimes that how much do I have to change? Maybe it's what I'm doing, or more so how I'm doing it. And those are companies that are going to survive.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that brings us nicely onto then your current assignment. You proudly said to me, the fact that you're the first, am I right in saying the first American CEO of the organization? Is that right? Of Qcells USA?
Qcells USA.
Yeah. And leading a core part of the wider Hanwha's vision with that. So, firstly, congratulations on this appointment. It must be a privilege to be the first American CEO of a global conglomerate.
Yeah, it shows the commitment and investment that Hanwha is making in the American market. It's most evident, down in Cartersville, Georgia. There's a $2.5 billion module manufacturing facility that's being built, where domestic content, domestic manufacturing, domestic jobs are happening today. And that's a big piece. That's significant investment. Likewise, on the on the EPC side, there's a certain way that Korean companies do business, in a global setting, but they also recognize there's a different way that American EPCs operate. And, they're making that investment. Hey, let's get some leaders from that American EPC space and, find some best practices and kind of, merge the two and, make sure that we're able to respond and support, the American market in the way that it needs to be supported. Because you can have the best value proposition in the world, but if you wrap it the wrong way, it's not going to be received, or it's not going to be successful. And the leadership at Hanwha at the highest levels are absolutely committed, to the American market, as EPC side. And as you mentioned, I'm very fortunate to kind of have this inaugural role, and hopefully they don't pivot back, that things go the way they're supposed to go. But really, it's an exciting time. I'm into it 6 or 7 weeks now, and the energy within the office and what people want to do, and that alignment and that collaboration, it's palpable. And so it's a great merge of, we have a number of Korean employees, a number of American employees, and it's, we work well together. There's some different, communication opportunities, whether it be language or whether it be cultural, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, it'll make us all stronger, because it's the different perspectives and kind of merging those two together.
Sure. Because it's not just I suppose it's not just the diversity. The diversity is obviously something that gets spoken about a lot, and rightly so, but it's not just the diversity of experience in terms of sectors that you look at, but diversity of cultures, diversity of language, the diversity of the way you communicate. All of these things can bring different perspectives that perhaps, in a kind of tunnel vision view, you might not see. And those things can be very, very beneficial. So I'm sure there's a huge amount of opportunity there. You touched on it at the beginning, but for those that don't know, perhaps would you mind giving just a bit of an overview of Qcells' mission? I know you spoke to me privately about the kind of the full service energy organization, but what does that actually mean, and how does what you're doing fit into this broader strategy of Hanwha in what they are trying to achieve? Sure.
There's a larger Qcells umbrella, of which there are 3 targeted efforts. One of them is EPC, which we're one leg of that 3-legged stool, if you will. The other is, as I mentioned before, the module manufacturing. And most people, when they hear Qcells or think of Qcells, that's what they think of, because one of the largest suppliers in the country on these projects, and you'll see them on a number of different projects. And then the third arm is energy services, which is the residential component, where it's focused on putting solar on people's houses and in communities. When you go larger, into that Hanwha universe, which is the Korean held company, they have some more entities that are around it. For example, we have a joint venture with what was 174 Power Global that is, we come together in a 50-50 joint venture from a developer standpoint, and it's called Hanwha Renewables. And so that's the front end a pipeline, our own pipeline. You'll go out there and partnering with developers, utilities, and owners in finding a pipeline of work for the EPC in order to vertically integrate modules, the EPC delivery, and then there's a component, handle convergence, which is the O&M solution. And so now we would take it from the Hanwell renewables, we would build the project, and we would hand off to Hanwell convergence, and they would operate and maintain that facility for its life cycle, 15, 20 years. And so, from an owner, the value proposition is, hey, you're dealing with essentially one larger company, one, connected entity that kind of can be aligned and grow with you and kind of, propagate accordingly. But we all kind of fall under the Hanwell solutions, and they're involved in a couple different areas. I mean, they do natural gas. There's some conventionally carbon powered facilities. Philadelphia Shipyard is a Hanwell Ocean evolution right now, and a lot of things in between. The Hanwell Energy umbrella is pretty large.
Sure, understood. Well, thanks for explaining that. So from an EPC specific perspective then, tell me a bit more about the plans for the next 12, 24 months. What's on your strategic roadmap, or the bits you can share anyway, and the challenge that lies ahead?
Sure. One area, as I mentioned earlier, where like the larger companies are a little bit, it's difficult for them to make significant changes to how they operate. With the EPC at Qcells being relatively new, now is the opportunity to implement, standard work and an operating system, that is predicated on consistency across projects. I called it earlier, decentralized operations. How you lead when you're not in the room. So if I have projects in California, I have projects in Wisconsin, projects in Texas or North Carolina, New York, they're going to do it the same way. The outcomes are the same quality. They're the same, standard accordingly. Likewise, how we interact and interoperate and operate, how paperwork is generated, change orders or earned value calculations, all these different things. We use the same template, we use the same format. And what we're doing is, it goes back to that muscle memory that I talked about earlier. We're not going to script everything. You're going to script about 80% of the job, the standard of work upon the job. So it does a couple things. Number one, I can train to that, and I can grow talent internally. I can take, it's a career, right? Somebody comes in right out of high school, right out of college, whatever it is, and then grow throughout the company. And there's a pathway for them to grow. And they know, hey, if I'm going to be a project engineer, this is what's expected of me, roles, responsibilities. Here's the playbook, I like to call it, of how I do my job. And likewise, I know how to do it. I can refer back to that, or I can use that as a training guide to get better and ready for the next level. Likewise, it's hard to grow totally organically. So attracting top talent from other companies and other portions of the business. Now with this platform, I can onboard them successfully. Instead of, some companies fall victim to, hey, I'm going to bring Josh in, and Josh is an all-star superintendent. He's just going to know what to do, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Josh does know what to do, and Josh only knows what Josh knows. Have I taken the time to say, hey, this is the Qcells way. This is the way we do it here. This is the software we use. Here's our file management structure. Here's who's responsible for what aspect of the job. And that way, right? And okay, great. I have my roadmap. I can go in there and I can contribute immediately, right? And then get right in on team. It's a better onboarding experience. It's a better outcome. And likewise, you can jump from one project to another, and it's run the same way, right? And we have a plug and play capability. If we need to surge, talent somewhere or body somewhere for whatever reason, we can do that. We can better manage our workforce. We can take them, and they don't have to, be at the beginning of the project, understand the dynamics of it. They kind of move into that project accordingly. So, and so that's where we're going. That operating system is going to enable us to operate in that way.
Sure. And it doesn't surprise me, but everything you've spoken about there is all about your people. It's all about ensuring you get the best from them, getting the best people into the organization, training them effectively, allowing them to deliver most effectively. And, sitting our side of the fence, we see how hard it is for organizations to attract the top talent. So you have to have both angles. You have to be able to grow your own. But there are those specialized times where you have to go to the market and bring in the best, and therefore you need to be an attractive proposition so they can see why they would join and what the possibilities are for them. So yeah, I can see that as a leader. That's very important to you, and how you position it strategically is one of the top priorities.
Yeah, I'm going to rephrase that a little bit. What we aspire to do, we want to create an environment and create a company that attracts people. So I mean, they want to be part of this effort. They want to be part of this team. They're valued for what they do. There's opportunity for them from a professional standpoint. They're cared for personally. They're respected, and that's the environment we're aspiring to attain.
Sure. Well, look, thank you for sharing all of that about Qcells, and I've no doubt you'll be successful in that journey. Just lastly, I suppose, before we move on to wrap up some of the conversation, something we haven't touched on so much, I suppose, is just some advice that you might give, particularly given your military background. I think that there's a lot of veterans that I talk to, maybe they have non-traditional backgrounds, they want to make an impact. Renewable energy is a space that a lot are attracted to. How would you give advice to somebody that wants to get into the industry but doesn't quite know how to position themselves, and how would you suggest they go about that?
Are you talking about a veteran, or are you talking about just anyone?
I think mainly positioned for veterans, given your background, but I'm sure there'll be some generic points, but maybe start with veterans and how they can use that, because we get approached a lot by people with ex-military backgrounds, and maybe it's not so easy for them to be able to articulate what they believe they have as to why they should be able to transition. So I think it'd be good for someone who's had it, such a successful career, to be able to explain how you did it, or what you think might be good things for them to consider. So
yeah, for people transitioning, the skill set that a military veteran brings, as you talked about earlier, is foundational in learning how to follow as much as learning how to lead. They will learn, and then they will apply. They're accountable. They're disciplined. They're able to learn new things. And so from a coachable standpoint, it's very powerful. And just because they haven't been in the renewable industry, you should not drop that resume or whatever down the pile, because they're going to bring leadership, in a way that your team needs it. Like, for example, even at the most difficult promotion on a solar project is from foreman to superintendent, where you're leading groups of people, and teams against schedules and deadlines and tasks, and how to articulate that and get people aligned is a skill set that the military brings, right off the table. And it will help close the gap of developing that in the field. It shouldn't be a crutch, shouldn't be a substitute for it. But I mean, they bring these intangibles that are hard to coach. I can coach you how to install a solar farm, right? Kind of how you do your piles and torque tubes and modules and things like that very easily. Here's how you do it. Here's a instruction sheets or checklist. But how you train leadership, that's hard, right? And that's where a lot of companies would benefit, by recognizing that. And the military people coming out being confident, they bring a lot of value to the table. They may not be able to spell solar, because they're brand new to it, not because they're not smart enough. But they're bringing things that group needs, or I don't care if it's finance, I don't care if it's auto mechanics, whatever it is. They bring something that is of great value that they've earned and they've owned over the years.
For sure, yeah. Because I think it's one of the most limiting things we see when we talk to clients is when of course, I understand that there are roles where prior experience is essential and it's absolutely needed. There are those roles, but I think that bucket gets put a bit too wide on roles that actually it's not so much needed, and therefore you miss out on talent that actually has the potential to go much further. For somebody who perhaps is capped at a certain level, but maybe at the start they're a little bit ahead, and actually being able to take a longer term view and invest in somebody who has those softer skills that they've learned through, maybe it's the military, maybe it's actually a completely different sector, but they could apply it and actually could go beyond. So I think some good lessons there, and some ideas for people to consider and think about. And before we wrap up, I've got a couple of quick fire questions I'd like to run with you, and then we'll close. So, if you were to have to summarize one leadership lesson that has stuck with you the most through your career, what would that be?
leadership is about, it's how you make people feel, right? And I'm not talking about, coddle people, but people feel empowered, people feel valued, people feel they're part of the team. That's when you get the most out of somebody. That's when people go beyond their perceived limits, when they believe in themselves. And if they have somebody who they know is on their side, is there, looking out for their success, I think that's really important. And it's an underappreciated trait of our most effective leaders.
For sure. What is a commonly held belief about the energy industry that you disagree with?
We kind of talked a little bit about it. The skills are not transferable. There's some nuances of solar installation in the field, but nothing that is insurmountable or requires 15 years of schooling, like a doctor or even a nuclear engineer. You go in there in the right system, the right coaching, the right ecosystem to onboard people. You can train those skills, those craft skills, and especially as you get up higher into leadership, people tend to downplay the value of leaders, versus technicians, and whereas the opportunity to kind of really look at that differently that'd be a game changer.
And talking about leaders, whether it's in energy or outside of energy, who's a leader that you most admire and why?
There's one. I mean, you can't see it on my wall right there. That's a friend of mine. His name was Doug Zembeck. He was killed in Iraq in 2007. And that what's written on there is like the Zembeck philosophy. And Doug, he's my age, grew up, was my peer, great friend of mine, but he was one of the people, he was nicknamed the Lion of Fallujah. You go online and Google Lion of Fallujah, you will read about Doug Zembeck. And when he was eulogized, they read from his journal. And, in this, what's written under are a couple things from that journal. Be a man of principle, fight for what you believe in, keep your word, live with integrity, be brave, believe in something bigger than yourself, serve your country, teach, mentor, give something back to society, lead from the front, conquer your fears, be a good friend, be humble and be self-confident, appreciate your friends and family, be a leader and not a follower, be valorous on the battlefield, feel the battle, and take responsibility for your actions. Never forget those that were killed and never let those rest that killed them, right? So, I mean, it's, the military sometimes can be a contact sport, but that was Doug, right? And that was his father too. And the kind of person, Doug, that goes to my first answer. You felt good when you were Doug. I mean, he just had this way of getting you to believe in yourself and getting you to, just value the people around you. And unfortunately, we lost him, too early. But the impact he had on the world, in that short amount of time that he was around, if I'm going to answer a question around somebody who I most admire as a leader, that's breaking the model right there, Doug Zembeck.
Sure. Well, I'm sorry for your loss, and he sounds like an incredible guy, and some absolute truths that he wrote there in his journal. So I definitely agree with those. So thank you for sharing that. That's very it's very moving. What's the most favorite part of your job?
Favorite part of my job is the people, collaborating, getting people. When you see that twinkle in their eye when they achieve something, or they think of something, or something connects, and all of a sudden, there's the synapses are firing, and now all of a sudden we're going to be 1 + 1 = 3. And they recognize, and they ask, it's happening right now, what kind of just, it's open. Hey, why is so-and-so not in the room? Right. They're recognizing, hey, they have perspective, they have value, they have, something to say here. And that stuff is starting to kind of connect, that's the kind of stuff that, because I'm like I said, I'm an old football player for Pennsylvania. I'm a pulling guard, the kind of, in our version of football. I just knock people down, knock things out of the way for people to score touchdowns, right? And so if I'm doing that, I'm knocking people out of the way and people are scoring touchdowns, that's when I'm happy, right? Because that's how I view my role. That's how I view my value.
Sure, absolutely. And the last one, as a nod to your military roots, the CV's motto, "Can do." Describe it in one sentence.
I got a sentence with a semicolon in the middle.
Okay.
It's figure it out, get it done, right? And CBs can do. They have a saying that's on the CB Memorial outside of Arlington Cemetery. The difficult we do today, the impossible we do tomorrow. And CBs pride themselves on figuring stuff out, and they recognize, hey, we need to be where the nation needs us to be, where the Marine Corps needs us to be successful. And whether it be building roads or drilling a well or building toilet facilities, right? It's what they do, and they'll figure out how to do it. One's great. We're in Kosovo years ago, and when that whole genocide situation was happening, and as the Serbs pulled out of a section of Jelani, they took the time to sabotage everything. They broke one leg off of every chair. They smashed valves in the water plant, all these different things. And so the CBs, on a very small footprint, they're in there. They got a machine shop that travels with them. They had a repairman, in a Navy rate that usually deploys on ships. Because if you're on a ship in the middle of the ocean, you're not going to stop at Home Depot to get your repair parts. You make them, right? And so this person was able to make valves in order to get that water system back up and running, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a perfect example of the CB can-do spirit, that they'll figure it out and get it done, and then kind of move on.
Absolutely, for sure. So as you know, the podcast is called Better Than We Found It, and it's telling the story of your journey to date, but also looking forward, I suppose, so that when you do eventually hang the gloves up or whatever it's called over your side, looking back at your legacy, what do you hope to have achieved to know that you've left the world better than you found it?
I like to think I'm a builder, and I say build leaders, and people, and therefore we build things, that people can see. But when people go off and do great things, I hear now from folks that either I've mentored or interacted with, they reach out and say, hey, that what we talked about, like, for example, Myers-Briggs and emotional intelligence and those kind of things, that stuff, I just shared that with my team, and I thought of you, and I just want to reach out and see how you're doing. Right. That to me is, paying it forward and kind of the things I've learned over time, and arming people with those tools that they can just take and advance it that much further. That to me, that's a measure of success, where there's I may not have a statue or a monument with my name on it somewhere, but, I made a difference in people's lives, and that they felt, and they appreciated.
For sure. Well, it sounds like you've already done that so far, but I'm sure there's many more that you'll be able to influence with that. Chris, thank you so much for sharing so openly, and some personal responses as well today. It's been great to talk it through. I'm sure the audience listening have learned a lot from that. If people are keen to connect, find out more about what you're doing with the business, or just, I suppose, reach out to you to interact and engage, are you happy for them to do so? And if so, where's the best place for them to reach you?
Sure. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, under my name, and I'll respond, and I get a lot of outreach and try to individually respond to everybody who does. It's kind of cool. I get everything from, kids starting out their careers in college, kind of, trying to map a way to, colleagues or folks who are in the industry and kind of looking for opportunity, or just to share ideas. And so that's usually the best spot, kind of, have a shout out to this great, podcast, and that's where you heard or connected, and you can kind of go from there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I'm sure you'll get some people flooding your inbox. Hopefully it doesn't take you too much away from your day job, but it's been great to talk to you today. I've no doubt you're going to achieve huge success in your current role, and I look forward to tracking the success as you move forward. But thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks, Josh. It's a great time.
So I'm sure you'll agree with me that Chris's story is a powerful lesson in translational leadership, proving that the principles of discipline, systems thinking, and servant leadership forged in the military and from his schooling days are not just relevant, but essential for tackling the biggest commercial challenges of our time. I think what really stood out to me is the idea of the operating system for people. It's one thing to have a vision for a multi-billion-dollar business, but it's another to design a framework that empowers thousands of individuals to execute that vision autonomously and effectively in a decentralized organization. And I suppose it's a powerful reminder that behind every megawatt of clean energy and every advanced solar panel, that there are crucial decisions about human capital being made in leadership teams. And if you can identify the right traits and build a resilient culture and also trust your team to deliver, that is the ultimate test of leadership. And that's really how you leave and truly leave an industry better than you found it. So thank you so much for listening today. It's Better Than We Found It. To learn more about Chris's work, you can visit Qcells online. And if today's conversation on leadership and scaling resonated with you, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague. Is the best way to support the show, or reach out to me directly at Josh Huggins at GS2, and I'll be delighted to talk to you. But until next time, take care and remember to leave the world better than you found it.
Thank you for listening to Better Than We Found It. These conversations are a powerful reminder that while emerging technology is crucial, having leaders with the conviction and resilience to see it through is the only way we will deliver what is required. This podcast is powered by GS2, where our mission is to build the leadership teams that are shaping the future. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, and the conversation doesn't need to end here. Please connect with me on LinkedIn to continue the discussion. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show so you never miss what's next. And until next time, let's all work to leave our world a little better